coat, right? So I can take it off and not get too warm. Please, get comfortable. Take off anything you want. What do I care? So welcome, and we're back to a little bit of calmness before the carnage begins. I don't normally wear a microphone in this smaller room, but there's a fair amount of ambient noise, so I'll just speak. And we'll begin. Unfortunately, I don't have a clicker, so I'll have to come back here to advance slides. A little preparatory information. Normally when I run workshops, I put you to work. We get you in rounds of 5, and you work in teams, and we take the whole bloody day. We have about an hour and a half and quite a few people. So I'm going to give you some tasks to do. Sometimes you'll do it in pairs, and sometimes you'll do it by yourself. But I'm also, I could talk about mobile all day, and usually do. So I just wanted to get set. So this is the wrong workshop. My mistake. I just put my fault. I'm on jet lag. I've been here almost a week, but I'm blaming it on jet lag. Okay, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. The Mobile Short Academy workshop. Thank you. And I would be doing this. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, cool. So first things are, it's only about an hour and a half, but you've been eating and drinking things. If you got to get up, just get up and go. You don't need to raise your hand. Don't be excused. Okay, you're adults. And if you don't know, the restrooms are right outside the hall and past the offices. So we're supposed to finish about 6, and that's my intention. And it is about mobile, but if you don't have your phone set on vibrate, just please do so. I don't care if you get up and have to answer calls. I live in the real world too, but I'd rather you not disturb the minimum amount of people when doing it. And 2 things. I'm passionate about this, and I end up speaking really fast sometimes. I get carried away and start writing really fast because I can do it. And usually people can follow it. But first of all, it may not be appropriate. We have a lot of ambient noise. If I say something and you miss it, raise your hand and ask. I don't mind. I'd rather elaborate. If I say something and you miss it and you don't raise your hand, it's your fault for not having asked me. If you miss it and later you're going, oh, what did he mean? I couldn't believe it. Similarly, I love questions. If I'm not clear, I love to elaborate because I forget what I have so internalized that I forget not everybody shares, okay? And you will get more. When I ask you to do things or ask questions of the audience, you will get more out of it if you actively think, if you contribute, and if you do the tasks. We know this about learning. You've heard about learning all day. So I just want to encourage you again to be active and participative. We saw this model. Anybody not seen this model earlier today? The 4 sort of core modes of mobile: content presentation, computation capability, communication, and capture. So what I want to do is refresh that now so we can talk about it. I want to start again, as I did today, talking about formal learning first. Now, I've said, and I believe, that mobile learning is not about courses on a phone. It might be about courses on a tablet, but actually in India, in retrospect, it would have been obvious. Come on, guys, have a seat. It might have been obvious to me if I'd thought about it that there's not as prevalence of tablets. So I do think it could be about courses on tablets, although that's not really, to me, the core application. But thinking about formal learning, I want to use this framework to think about the major components of learning. They don't have to go in this order, but the standard sort of instructional design orders, we give an introduction. And as you'll find out tomorrow, I believe it should be a motivation and compelling introduction. Concept presentation, I don't like people giving just rote procedures. I like giving people conceptual models that explain the procedures. This is really examples. We model applying the concept to a context. So we show how you apply that concept to solve a problem. And then we give the learner opportunity to solve the problem. Meaningful practice. And then we guide reflection, linking what they did back to the concept presentation. And eventually we have a graceful exit out, which includes things like acknowledging the emotional commitment and things. Most of our instructional design doesn't include enough on emotional engagement, but that's tomorrow's stuff. Now, the reason I want to go through that is just to use that as a framework to think about taking advantage of mobile. So this is an exercise I like to use because, as I said this morning, the best way to take advantage of mobile is to start thinking differently. And this is the first way to start thinking differently. So I want you to take a piece of paper and make this chart. And I don't want you to fill out every cell. We don't have time. Do that on your own time later. But I do want you to take some time right now. And I want you to, well, let me explain this. So you already heard about intro, concept, example, practice, reflection. SMS or text messages. You could also include MMS or multimedia messages there if you want. Voice. Voice is actually talking to a person. Whereas audio is a canned bit of audio, a podcast, okay? Video is either a video or an animation. It can have audio or not, but it's some dynamic visual. A document. It doesn't have to be just text. It can have images embedded in it. It can be a PDF or whatever. It can be rich document, but essentially it's a static visual. And finally, an interactive. An interactive means you do stuff and it does stuff back. It could be a simulation. It could be an assessment or anything. Now, what I want you to do with your chart is I don't want you to try and fill out every cell now, although it's not a bad exercise at some point. But I do want you to try to put something. Okay, how many of you are developing content for some purpose, for some need, or have learners that you're responsible for? How about the rest of you? What are you doing here? Get out of here. Sorry, you'll see, I crack jokes. I mean nothing by it except to make fun of myself. So what I want you to do is to fix in that mind some of that content, and I want you to figure out what you might do. And I want you to put at least one thing in every column and one thing in every row. Oh, I get to get feedback. Woo. Can we make you really crazy? But I would like you to just think about how you would, maybe use a voice intro or a video example. But I want you to put something in every column and every row just to practice applying this framework of thinking outside the box about the channels you now have available to you. Yes? Yes, exactly. Thank you. And great. I wish I had something to throw at, candy or something for having intervene and ask questions. Please. No. Concept is when you introduce learning. Ideally, you help make it visceral. You will have examples of how the concept plays out in practice, but the concept is the underlying model. Whatever it is, and I believe anything you're really trying to teach should have a model behind it. That's a longer discussion about advanced instructional design, but I really mean the conceptual model behind it. And it's a set of conceptual relationships that explain why or how you should be solving these problems. It's the structure of the model, and we can communicate it through visualizations, through text, through a number of ways. And I just want you to find a way to communicate it with one of those channels. One of your columns should be concept. One of your elements, you should have at least one element in that column showing, thinking outside the box about how to do it. Everybody clear on that? In support of some objective you're trying to help develop learners to achieve. Good learning starts with meaningful objectives that says what they'll be able to do afterwards. This is to support that some learning objective you have. Okay? Go. Fill out your one row and something in every row and something in every column. didn't do it. He did it.
What to actually be like in these
Just
intro has to be like
think of a course that has some particular learning objective you're trying to achieve. How do you introduce it to them? How do you make it viscerally important? How do you help them understand why they should be doing the rest of this? And figure out how you would pass that message with either an interactive or a doc. Interactives don't necessarily make sense there, but with an audio, what would you do with an audio? So, what would you do with a text message?
so I need to write what we would be doing here.
Yeah, just put something in there.
The combinations can be applied?
Yes, yeah. Some way you'd meet a goal of an intro with one of those channels. Some way you'd meet a concept presentation with one of those channels.
Video plus audio. Video with audio.
It can be, yes. It can be either with or without, but it's a dynamic visual potentially augmented by audio. I'm trying to be divergent, not very restrictive. Thinking through some of those things. Doesn't mean you actually have to capture it, although I recommend it, but I'm going to make your life difficult. I'm going to stay on the move. It's just how I am. Yes. Sure. Huh?
Suppose you want to inspire them before even taking them on the road.
Well,
rather than recreating the cycle every time.
Where did that come from? Yeah, you're picking up. But anyways.
I see this in most of the universities. One example is
Wow.
a colleague of mine, not a colleague, and actually I worked with her when I was at Microsoft.
Can we?
University of Delhi. Where
sir, we pass this on to him when he comes back. Let him know what I said. But he was asking, maybe exciting them before they even get to the intro. To me, that's part of the role of the intro. To me, the very first thing an introduction should do is hook you in viscerally, emotionally. I believe if you don't understand personally why it's really relevant to you, the rest of it's wasted. But that's me. So, okay. Now, based on the disruption and such, and now everybody's looking up, I think the energy level has kind of said we're done with that exercise. And that's fine. I don't expect you to do it all. I really just wanted you to go through some of that thinking process about different channels, because to me that's part of bringing a break out of the standard learning mode and start saying, what can we do with little chunks in different modes? Anybody come up with something really interesting they thought of? Okay, I'm going to use your notes just to refresh this because I don't think everybody could hear you. He was talking about an intro with voice and the concept presentation with text messages and the examples with YouTube. And so he's mixing it across social media sites as well. The practice is a mobile game. Okay, and absolutely. I want to tell you a little story. University of Aberdeen was teaching about, and I don't actually know the learning objective, but I'm going to make it up, but it's a real application. I don't know if it's about politics or it's about emergency management, but they have this simulation that puts you in the role of a provincial governor in southern France. And the situation is that you get a message that a flood is beginning. You get a sign that there's, I guess, rain up the river. And then, you have to decide how to do it because you're the provincial representative has to make decisions like this. And that's why I don't know if it's government or municipal or emergency management. But then you have to make a decision. And you could decide to do nothing, which is a decision in itself, and the river's going to still rise, or you could start putting out alerts and things. And there's a sequence of actions. It's an entire branching scenario. Now, the interesting thing is that the way a provincial governor in the south of France would receive this information would be text message. This entire simulation is run through text message. Somebody pings you essentially and says, oh, we got an indication of, river rising. What are you going to do? Oh, would you just make sure and check on our level of amount of sandbags for levees in case we have a problem? And would you go check the latest update on the state of the levees, whatever it is? And there's a whole branch scenario. Whatever decisions you make or don't make, this still happens, and it plays out over time, and they built a whole engine to do this. And to me, this is just a fabulous example of getting meaningful, deep practice out of something as simple as text messages. So the lesson there is just because you don't have mobile web or you don't have apps doesn't mean you can't do powerful learning, augmentation. Any other reflections on that exercise? Did that help you think out of the box a little bit and break out of the thinking? I see a lot of heads nodding. I don't see anybody doing this, but they could be doing this, so I don't know. I still have trouble with that, I confess it. You know, if there's not enough vertical motion in it, it just looks like somebody shaking their head. So, you know, you get tuned, I think, to detecting this. So almost in an editorial note, but I really believe it's important. The traditional mode is intro, concept, example, practice. But one of the things you can do is start making it flexible. I want to choose to go to control of your own learning experience. You could. But if you did want to seize it, you had the navigation ability to jump anywhere you want. And some people really do want to see examples first or practice first. And in fact, practice first is increasingly being recognized as powerful learning. Whether it's problem-based learning, performance-based learning, service learning, case-based reasoning, seeing a real problem is a motivating example in a sense that helps you understand why it's important. If it's a context you recognize and a situation you recognize as important, then we've set the stage for you to go, oh, now I know why I need to learn this. And mobile could give us an opportunity to navigate around that way or to launch things off. You've heard of blended learning. Instead of, you know, getting all the concepts down up front, and I still think that's a good idea, but how about awakening them before even the learning starts with some example up front that they get via their mobile device before the learning ever starts. I already went through this earlier today, right? You saw this diagram. I'm not going to reiterate it. There is no Nuremberg funnel. You can't dump knowledge in the head. You can't just take a learner and dump knowledge and think it's going to lead to any learning. You need to do more. You need to space it out. And you need to give them, you need to reactivate it. And reconceptualization, seeing another way of thinking about it, showing another concept frame. Instead of the text, now we're going to show one diagram, we're going to make another cut through it, is good. Recontextualizing it, seeing another example supports transfer. The more different contexts we see in examples in practice is the broader space we'll apply it to. And if we see some negative examples, that'll keep us from going too far and generalizing inappropriately. And then reapplication is the most powerful. Practicing again and again and again is what's necessary to break out of this. So, but with mobile, we don't want to do, too often as instructional designers, they want to do everything. Okay, we've got to make sure we've covered all our bases. It's like the legal department. You know, we just got to do everything we can to make sure we don't get sued. Instructional designers, well, we've got to put everything in there to make sure we've covered it. And you've got to get out of that thinking with mobile. You absolutely got it. So instead of what's everything we can put in, what's the least we can put in? In fact, I have a mantra. It's the least assistance principle. What's the least I can do for you? Doesn't that sound kind of rude? But it's right. What's the least you need to be able to move on? And that's what we want to focus on. So what I want you to do is take sort of that, maybe that same objective. And I want you to figure out, what is the most streamlined way you could help them understand what it is they're about to see? What is the absolute minimum you could do? And then what is the most streamlined way you could present a concept to them to help them get their mind around it? What is the simplest way you could communicate an example? And then finally, what's the, and I only want one of each, okay? Ideally, you do lots of practice, but right now for this exercise, I just want you to say, what is the most simplest practice I could communicate through any of those channels we saw, but I want you to design a Learnlet. And you can collaborate with somebody, or you can do it on your own. If you've got somebody you work with right there, do it together. But I want you to just sit down and spend, 5-10 minutes brainstorming about, and prototype it, just sketch it, be concrete. Don't have it up in your head. Try and get concrete, because you know as well as I, you ever have a thought that you think you understand, then when you write about it, you realize, oh, I haven't figured out this quite, or this diagram, and you write. So I want you to try and get a little concrete and just storyboard it, sketch a prototype, but I want you to design a learn for something that's the absolute minimum you can do, okay? Any questions on that? Okay, off you go. Oh, wait, we do have a question. Hold on. In terms of, you can think of it a couple ways. The minimum amount of data you'd send to make it happen, the minimum amount of ink to paper, or pixels to screens, just absolute minimum. Okay? Any other questions on that? Let's try it. While everybody else does it. Will I cause feedback if I get too close? There I go, being difficult again. Sorry about that. Yeah, pan the marker. Captures it for you. I don't care which medium you use, but say, if I were going to do a practice, it would be an SMS simulation. Yeah. Or it might be a web multiple choice question, whatever it is.
But not exactly the task.
I just capture it in a way that you're concrete about it. I don't care how you represent it, okay? What's the minimal you can do? What's the least I can do for you to achieve? As long as it's really small in visual presentation and is doable on a mobile device. I want it to be minimal. Was that challenging? Did you manage to get your mind around it? I realize some people were having some questions a little challenging. And it is. The whole point is to help you break out of the way. As Les was saying, wow, this is going to be really challenging for the typical writer, instructional designer who's used to throwing everything in. Absolutely, and that's what I really want to break. So, any other reflections on this that you had? Please.
Second would be to give them the hyperlink or the URL addresses from where they can access all that information. Third was the perspective or theme, then graphics, and after that, after they have done their research, just have a question and answer session without any papers.
Okay.
So informal.
Yeah, I think you kind of ran. Okay, well, I'm not going to present the content. I'm just going to give them links, and they still get all the content. I'm trying to get you to stop that. So instead of tell them why they're going to learn them, just show them, make it visceral really quickly. Boom. I'll give an example of that in a second. But see, it's hard, it's challenging, and yet that's the shift I want. I don't want the, minimize my work. I want to minimize the learner experience in going from being introduction to having done a practice and have tried it. I want to minimize the amount of cognitive work and the amount of data I'm taking in, the amount of pixels I look at. And I realize that's challenging, and that's why we do this, is to shift thinking a little bit. Please.
So we have an idea of coming on games for kids from 5 to 15. So the best way in which we can target them is show them the game. For a student of age group of 5 to 10, it's the game that matters. He is not concerned about EQ quotient or IQ quotient or any other thing. It's the matter of concern for the student, for the teachers, and for the elders. So it's just that we can show them an image, a guy playing on a screen, and the results are being reflected to the parents who are beside him. Is that?
Okay, well, yeah, I don't actually believe, in putting intro and concept and example in the game. There's an interesting research area, but I'm not sure that's the best bet. But I mean, absolutely, as long as the game is minimal. Bing, bing, it'd be sort of like the least one Angry Birds problem. Ideally would be the minimum, and that's sort of overproduced in terms of production values. But yeah, I like games as a powerful practice experiment. Yeah, we'll get to it. I appreciate this dialogue. Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, if I try to teach trigonometric ratios to secondary school, students,
Some hyperbole, please.
I think it will interfere in that room. So.
Yes, revenge.
So, if you're trying to teach some student trigonometric ratios to measure, heights or whatever, there are conventional things like measure ratios, equilateral triangles, whatever, those kind of things. So you could send a simple SMS. I'm trying to simplify it and say, hey, do you want to try to measure the height of the electric pole next door? And call me at this number, tell me what are the different ways. And then you could give an audio which could say, I'm sure it would have been easier if you could bring the pole down, and then you can use your measuring tape. So the focus is more on experience than trying something else there.
Well, I like that. I might just show them the equation or something, but I like making it concrete, and I really think it's out of the box thinking about contact me, although what you're doing is then you're going to end up dumping all the knowledge on them. How do you minimize that, when they talk, I'll tell you all the ways. No. Just streamline it down. I'll show you a theoretical model. First, I'll show you an example, and then I'll show you another example, and then I'll give you the theoretical model behind the second example, which is some really interesting work. Gosh, everyone's had work. I think she was first, and then you, and we're still getting to you. Don't worry, and then we'll get over here. Great, please.
So I was facing a couple of challenges. One was we primarily work with behavioral side of learning and development, and it seemed very challenging to actually break it down into very small bites. So I initially tried, I have an idea which I'm trying to put down in very few words, and I was trying to actually cut down on words, and then it was becoming extremely prescriptive, which is not how one wants to go about behavioral training at all. So I think one of the ways which struck me as a possibility was both the prescriptive part going away, and B, the amount of language required. Probably it's not so much to do with the exact message that you want to convey as much as to provoke thought. So the stimulus has to be strong enough, and if it's something which is stimulating enough, like an image which brings out which helps somebody tap into their experiences and draw some reflections, probably that one screenshot is good enough.
Well, absolutely, I agree, and I like what you said. Behavioral training, I'd be inclined to focus on the practice, and despite asking you to do this, I don't necessarily believe everything has to come through the mobile device. I think there might be a sense where somewhere you get the intro and concept, but then we stream out a practice and another behavioral simulation, just little quick ones, but give you practice. And then when you get back in class again or something, or get on the web or something, you might have much richer practice, but you've had a bunch of component practice to get you ready for that. Absolutely.
So although I agree with the concept of the less is good, something that I constantly am challenged with is wondering whether the other person's actually understood, and sometimes then getting stuck with having to repeat the entire exercise because
if they can do the practice, they've understood. If you design the practice right, they can't do it. But it's
so the question actually is the step before practice. If they're not even willing to practice, is probably because they haven't gotten it in the first place.
Well, yeah, and like this is an artificial example, right? but we would give them probably some more examples. We might give them a very simple practice that they could get right, depending on how anxious they are. You know, if they're overconfident, you want them to fail, because then they go, oh, okay, I guess I really don't know this. If they're exceedingly underconfident, you want to give them very gentle success until you build their confidence. Then you whack them over the head. But absolutely, you want to it is about, you know, like I said, this is an artificial example just to force you to start thinking minimalist. At the end of the day, you start breaking up and figure out the right thing at the right channel, but we so end to err on overproduction. I really want you to think about underproduction first and then work your way back to what's the least I can do. Okay? And back to the thing about prose. One of the exercises I do when I run this as an all-day workshop, there's some prose that I was given by that negotiation subject matter expert, and I reduced it by half. And I can do that with almost anybody's prose. I can reduce it by half, and that includes my own, by the way. It takes me 2 passes. I get the thoughts out, and then I reduce it. It really is a worthwhile exercise. No, something else, but I've lost it. Let's hear from another one of our...
So, you know, I think if it's come to responsible adults, I think get rid of intro. They know why they're here. They know why they're doing it. They don't need to look at jazzy colors and, you know, nice music before they get started. Get rid of it. Concept and example, they're pretty much the same. You know, marry them together. Have something which is common, you know. Have your concept embedded in your example. You typically don't need too much of practice, because practice only makes it permanent. It doesn't make it perfect, you know. So you keep on practicing the wrong stuff, and then you become very good at doing it wrong. So that's behaviorism. That's it's slightly military, but I think behaviorism for dogs. You know, I think that's a good way to fetch your, you know, train your dog to bring you newspaper, but not for humans. So give them a concept, give them an example, tell them where to go to practice if they still need it, and I think that we're done. That's the minimalistic thing you can go with.
Well, absolutely, I like to do that. Although I don't like to lump concept and example together for a simple reason. That's most textbooks are written, they're mixing it all in. It turns out if you separate them out, then you start having the ability to customize it. So if I can profile you as a learner versus you as a learner, maybe given your context, I'd have a better example for you than I would for you. And if I have them separated, and that's where we start having the ability to deliver adaptive instruction. And that's one of the things I think is an option on the table. There was back here.
Location is interesting with mobile, with learning in mobile, because it's like, for instance, if you're doing geography-based something, it's interesting because the mobile knows where the student is, so you can probably throw them up, you know, some sort of questions on that, and or even for math, for instance, so you're doing speed and distance, you can actually tell the learner that you traveled 20 kilometers, you're 20 kilometers away from initial distance, and you did it in 1 hour's time. So what kind of speed is? So I think if you can get the location-based thing, because that makes it really interactive out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you need the custom content flexibility to tag it. But absolutely, imagine geography or geology. Hey, you're here. Look at that rock formation. What formation is that? What type of rock is that? You're using the context. And again, you're connecting that abstract concept to their world, and that increases the elements that are activated in the pattern matching and increases the likelihood they'll be able to regenerate it when they need it out after the learning experience. Thank you.
The slide where it showed problem-based. At every level, we can, make the learner practice. What I believe is we can divide the concept into learning objects, and I want to use just video and SMS, right? And for each of the learning objects, I'll send a link on a mobile, and I'll put my video on YouTube channel, and the learner will go through the learning object, and followed by, we are going to send the quizzes through SMS.
Yeah, absolutely. You could do that. That's very minimal. The one other option, and I have nothing wrong with what you said, but just another, do you guys have MMS where you have messages you can send media, videos, and audio? So you could do it that way as well. And I'm not sure which is better. They're going to download the video either way. It's going to be streamed or it's going to be downloaded on their machine either way. So I'm not sure there's any benefits one way or another. But absolutely, I love it. Text messages are minimal, and just ideally you'd use short videos. Thank you. Oh.
I think I ended up choosing the case where all four kind of, converge into one single learning experience. So the outcome I chose was moral education. How does a kid learn that telling lies is a bad thing? And initially I started out with each of them separate, but I think final case and narrowed down out with was dial a story. So the child just dials a number, and there are only 3 things the child can do. Case 1, it hears different short stories narrated in a traditional Indian grandmother kind of style, and all those stories implicitly convey in one way or the other way that lying is bad. Option 2, the child records the instance in his or her own life where how and why the child lied. And option 3, randomly another child's recording of how that child lied is just broadcast one at a time. I hear one, and then I want to hear the next one. I just hear the next one whenever the child is bored. So
there was a little bit
all of them integrate into one.
Yeah. Actually, my colleague was working for the Dalai Lama Foundation, and he was CTO for it for a while. And he created the ethics game, and indeed they captured kids talking about real instances where they were threatened with ethical challenges. Here's somebody doing something wrong. Do I report it or not? And they told bits, and then they were given some information. Then they got to hear how the story played out. Absolutely. Although the best learning about lying is you lie, you get caught out on it, you get all the embarrassment, and you kind of learn that didn't work too well. So.
That sounds like it could be really, really wordy. How did they do that in a minimalist way?
Well, it wasn't minimal. It was web-based instead of mobile. But it was videos. And they edited them down just to the most poignant parts of the story. And so it wasn't necessarily minimal, but actually it was pretty minimal. It was just that little poignant story and a little bit of prose, and then hearing the way the story played out. And you could make some decisions. There was a little bit of scenario stuff in it. I don't remember the details anymore. It's still available online, or at least a story about it is available online. So one of the examples, and this is totally made up example, okay? Totally made up. I've pulled together different pieces. This is my model about using the right media for the message. If you're trying to convey context, like in an example, you'll use a photo if it's static or a video if it's dynamic. And we can approximate. We can do a sequence of videos with an audio and photos with an audio narration a la Ken Burns' Civil War, and we can have what's equivalent of video. But really, it's dynamic. If it's conceptual, not contextual, if we're showing the model, we might use a graphic, a diagram, or an animation if it's dynamic. And if it's linguistic, we have text. And if we need to have our attention elsewhere so we're not reading the text, we can use audio. And the point was, the intro was just a comic strip. He's digging the Panama Canal, and he's using a shovel. You really need, so she's going, steam shovel? It's very short, very poignant. And then an example, a label to accompany a diagram, text. Representing the workplace, a picture. We're using minimalist prose here, not even complete sentences. And then we have practice. What would be the steps to install an auto part? And we might have a drop-down menu of these things. And similarly, interaction of ecology systems, you drop down. And the point is to, it's made up. Oh, I've got antivirus. Woohoo, my databases are obsolete. You guys got to update your database. The message has been coming up all day. But the point is, just strip it down. I'm going to go on the other one. Did you have your hand up for an issue there? No, he was just stretching. Okay. Now that's made up. But on this side is a classic study. John Carroll, way back when word processors were the monolithic big machines about the size of this podium, one of the early ones, the IBM Display Writer, they had a big instructionally designed manual about the size of a phone book that people had to learn with. And they weren't doing very well. And so John Carroll had actually looked at adventure games and saw how rabid people were to play those. They would spend hours trying to figure out how to get around the colossal cave, and yet they wouldn't spend the time to do something that mattered for their work. So he took some principles down. And he created, as opposed to that big manual, he created a number of cards, I don't know, 1926, of this size. And so he tried to say, again, that minimalist principle, what's the least I can do for you? But he focused, a couple principles led to this. By the way, that set of cards, he then did the independent test and compared people who were trained with the instruction design manual and people who used these cards, and then he tested afterwards. The ones that used the cards outperformed by far the ones that used the instruction design manual. So how did he design it? The first thing is he focused on their real goals. Not what are the features of the system, but how do you accomplish real goals you want to accomplish. Delete text, create a mail merge of addresses and letters. And then he figured out what's the least they did. And the way he did that was, so the one goal was focus on real goals. The second principle was give the learner credit for having some real knowledge. Leverage what they have. They know about buttons and things. They know how to figure out, notice that the menu appears. They can look at it. They don't have to show a photo of it and stuff. And he simply went down and down and down and repeatedly trimmed it down and tested it and refined it again and again and again, and managed to succeed in trimming that down and outperforming the instruction design manual. Great example for the purposes of thinking about minimalism. A new version, by the way, you know Atul Gawande's Checklist Manifesto? Fabulous book. It's about, Atul Gawande is a physician in the US, but he got really interested in survival rates in developing world. So he went off and he looked at what was happening, and he found that just a few simple cleanliness procedures looked like they could have a huge impact. And he developed procedures, checklists for them to follow while they were doing this. And when they followed them, the survival rates went up like 60%, saving lives just by little checklists, because our brains are bad at remembering all the steps. And there's a few other things about how we interact in authority and things that were interfering. And he would revise and test and create checklists that had huge impacts. He went back and did it in the US and had the same effect, huge impacts in supposedly, you know, a great healthcare system, large amounts of flaws that were fixed by simple procedures. So this minimalist focus on just what people need to accomplish the goal is a really useful approach. Any questions on that? Yeah, please.
The steps for when you start writing down the steps for simulations, like
Let's pick the microphone.
My voice is a little gone. But when we create the steps, write down the steps to perform some activity in an application. So what we do is we usually tell write the action and what we are performing and what is the result. So when I see this deleting text, so when we are talking about minimalism, so should we only talk about action and not the location or the resultant of that particular step?
Well, this was for performance, right? This wasn't for formal learning. He was just trying to get people able to use this tool to do their job. So there's a slight difference there. And I still wouldn't want, the checklist manifesto wasn't everything you had to do. These were physicians, surgeons. They knew a lot. And you couldn't possibly have every step in a heart procedure identified in this. So it was only those places where people went wrong reliably, where they skipped it for complex reasons, that he had just those few steps that increased the success. And he tested them and revised them and tested them again and refined them until he got it spot on. So they had an initial conception. And the same thing, here, he was just focusing on where did people go wrong, and he tested it and refined it before he finalized it, and then he ran the test against other people. So now for formal learning, I do want to give credit to learners for what they know. I want to give the minimum information to scaffold them there. I want to do it as quickly as possible. One of the great things about games is they get difficult as fast as you can stand it. If you can't stand it, you fail, and then it gets, you go back a little bit. But too often, we bore learners with too small steps, or we give them too big a challenge, or we don't get them anywhere near where they really need to be before we release them. So, yeah. Please.
Can we make, are there any methods to make the practice more interesting than the textual questions?
That's tomorrow's topic.
Thank you.
It's about, it's supposedly game design, but even writing better multiple choice questions will tap into the principles I'll be talking about finding meaningfulness, both in terms of what you do affects the story and in that you care about the story, and a number of other things. But again, we'll delve into that much deeper. So you guys good so far? Any meta things? Is this making sense to you so far? You finding this valuable or shaking you a little bit about opportunities to think differently and take advantage of this? That's really what we're hoping to achieve. So now I want to come back to this for a very specific purpose. if we carve up our content this way, and I've already made the point that there's a value in carving it up in these small chunks for flexible delivery, but there's another sense, besides personalized delivery, there's another sense in which we do this. I want to differentiate, by the way, between a motivating example and a reference example. That little cartoon I showed about digging the canal, that's not a reference example, right? That's not going to help you use the right tool for the job. All that does is help you understand the concept of use the right tool for the job. And by the way, that came from some real content we used. We were doing it for actually using it for sales training, and that opened up about the sales tools that were available for this particular process the training was going on. We do not use comic structure. And I don't mean comics, humor comics. I mean like graphic novel formats. We way underuse them in learning. They're very powerful. They globalize really well because most cultures have comics as part of their popular literature. And they're really easy to change. You just got to make sure your text box is big enough to handle German, and then anything else will fit in there. And they're low in bandwidth, so they translate well. And you can strip away the unnecessary context by just drawing, and people can fill in more of their own details. And you can use the thought bubbles to illustrate their own thinking. Really great things. But anyways, motivating examples just help you viscerally understand why this is important. Then there's reference examples, but we get there. But so if we have those examples, we could make those available before the learning, stream them out on a mobile device. But as we have these elements, having them available at other times than formal learning, not only breaking them up and streaming them out and breaking up the learning experience, but also using them for performances for performance contexts. The models, the diagrams you give them, is there any chance that those might be useful when they're out really solving problems in the world? If so, make them available. And have multiple ones. And this is a lesson about the development side of it. When you're developing the content the first time, develop those extra frameworks at that time. Your mind's ready to do it. Otherwise, if you go back and try and retrofit, it's really hard to get yourself, it's much more efficient to do it while you're doing it. But have multiple frameworks, because the one you show in the learning experience, if you're personalizing it, I might give you a different one than I give you. But also, then I can give you a different one later on to reactivate it and stream it out. Reference examples, the examples you give them to show them how it applies. There's a number of criteria that go into doing a really good example, but one of them is, this is like the problems they're going to see in the real world. And then, if they see that problem out in the real world, maybe they'd like to see that, I saw an example like that that might help me solve this. Why not make it available to them? And again, across the examples, the different contexts we see will define the space we will transfer to. So we want to make sure we have enough examples from as widely disparate contexts as we can. And then practice. Can we space the practice out and have little practices that reactivate the knowledge and give them some variety in how it plays out in different contexts? And any job aids that you give them in the learning experience should be available in the real world. And likewise, if there's any job aids they should be using in the real world, you should have available in the learning context too. I'm a big advocate of open book tests. If they're going to do open book performance in the real world, why do we have to do it? And then we can give them self-evaluation rubrics after the practice, or we can actually connect them to somebody. And remember, we can start doing that on their performance in the real world where it's not practice, it's performance. We can turn to learning. So to the extent we start thinking about greater integration, about content models, we start supporting development. Any content we develop, we should develop in rich and well-articulated ways to support both flexible delivery and support mobile. And your output should also include mobile acceptable formats as part of your development processes going forward. I've already gone through this model, right? So let me give you another activity. Thinking about your learners, and not now the learning experience, but say they have a performance opportunity in the real world with a learning goal, whether it's math or English or geography or geology. If they're not going to use it in the real world, why are you bothering? And if they do use it in the real world, think about it in a situation and think, for your particular learning objectives as something they need to be able to do in the real world, what could you give them beforehand to make them more effective and maybe make it a learning experience? What could you give them during to make them more effective and maybe make it a learning experience? And what could you do after to really cement that learning experience? What could you give them for your particular needs, your particular learners? What could you do? Just quickly come up with something for each of those. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, just, pardon? I want something for every. Something you do before, something you do during, and something you do after. Sorry. Not when they're in the learning experience. When they're out in the real world and they might be applying it or should be applying that, what could you do to make that not just improve their performance, but also is there anything you could do before, during, or after to make it a learning experience? Either one or both. Feel like I've got enough people who are sort of beginning to look around and go, what's next? I figure it's time to move on. Did anybody have any challenges in doing that? Usually the challenge is, too often they're going, well, I don't know how they use it in the real world. This is what the subject matter expert told me that they need to know. There's this real problem. Subject matter experts no longer have access to how they do something. So, I don't know if not all of you are old enough to remember, back in the 80s there was this expert systems that they were going to solve every problem because we just get the expert system to do it and then it would do it perfectly every time. So they go to the experts and say, what do you do? And the expert go, oh, I do this and this and this. And they build the system to do this and this and this. And they'd run it and it would fail miserably. Went back to the expert and go, what's going on here? And they go, I don't know, that's what I do. So they watched the expert. And he didn't do this and this and this. He did that and that and that. They don't have access to it. They don't even know what they do. They do it well, no argument. But it's been compiled away. That's the way our brains work. And so they had to start building it. It turns out they couldn't build it the way they thought they did. But the problem for learning design is that your subject matter experts don't know what they do, so they go, but they do have access to what they learned. They do remember that, so they go, oh, well, I had to learn this, and I had to learn this, and I had to learn this. And the good little instructional designer goes, oh, okay, I'll make sure they learn this, and this, and this. And there's a bunch of knowledge dump, and it doesn't lead to any meaningful change. So you have to get more concrete, but you have to start knowing what you want them to be able to do out in the real world. And that's one of the things about better instructional design. Make sure your objectives for the learning experience are things that they're going to be able to do that they can't do now that are going to be important for them. And that then makes this much easier because then you know what they're doing out in the real world and how you might support them, particularly if it's an extended learning experience where you really don't get enough time with them as much as you'd like. So we can extend that learning. Any comments on that? Well, To me, you know, beforehand, it could be a reminder of some relevant concepts that they should have active, and by making it active, it's more useful going to be during the session. Or a plan. It might be that you made a plan before you get there, and you want to have it then right there to review before you start. And there may be other things you can do. During, resources, like information resources, lookup sheets. So it's crazy. In product training, they'll have hundreds of routers that these people need to keep in mind. There's no way they can keep them all in mind. Just make lookup sheets so when you figure out which one you have a drill down, or it might be active assistance, a little decision tree. Well, put in, you know, how many people they're trying to serve and how secure they need, whatever, and it can provide aid. And then afterwards, maybe guide reflection, self-evaluation. How did this go? Did you remember to do this? Did you remember to do this? Did you remember to do that? Or a follow-up. Okay, what's your plan? What are you going to do, you know, now? Should you look up that you weren't remembering? Or what's going to be your plan for next time if this is a continuing engagement or something like, you know, I got to visit this client again. Any questions on that? Thoughts? Okay, good. Presume now you can see why I took off the coat. I get pretty animated here. Generate a lot of heat. So we talked about Facebook and Twitter and Skype earlier today, right? The social part of the learning picture. So I want you to think, how can you use mobile tools to get learner participation in class? Huh? Polling questions, sort of like an audience response system, and you can do it anonymously. Recognition of achievement. You could, how would you do that? So during class, if they answer a question, you could give them a star type of thing? Okay. Oh, so you could have some sort of visual wiki or something, and that they could be a Twitter stream, right? So people, and multiple people could be commenting. The problem with the classroom is only one person can speak at a time, but this way a number of people can put their thoughts out. Absolutely. Show and tell, so people could capture stuff and then show it in the classroom and say, this is what I found about this topic. Absolutely. Voting? Sure. It's like the polling suggestion. We can have multiple choice, but we can have vote. We can have debates. And you know the type of debates where two people present, and it's that Cambridge model where at the end of the day, a number of people go out door one and the number of people go out door two, and you figure out who wins by who chooses which door. Yeah, you know. So there's lots of opportunities to use tools even within class. You know, so many teachers are scared of using the tools in class. Oh, I could lose control. They could be tweeting. They could be. I remember talking to a medical school, and they had these beautiful labs, circular rooms with a lecture in the center and rows of desks, and they all had PowerPoints, and they all had Wi-Fi, and the professor's going, we'd like you to turn off the Wi-Fi while we're in class. Well, they could be day trading. You know, you can shut off the Wi-Fi, then they'll play solitaire. And you take away their computers, they'll doodle or play tic-tac-toe. I mean, it's not the technology is the problem, right? If you're not engaging them. Okay, so how could you use mobile tools to get learner participation out of class? Well, augmented reality, but that depends on if it's individual or, you know, I'm trying to get them to participate, engage with each other, the social part of it. So, but you can, a number of the alternate reality games were really getting people to coordinate. So somebody'd find this and somebody'd find this, and they deliberately were strewing clues in different places so they'd have to collaborate to figure out. One of the classic cases was they had to organize a team to get somebody to Oklahoma to answer that phone when it rang at that time. So that would be a possibility. There was a hand back here. Okay, so they could, now they can submit their assignments to the teacher, but how about collaboration on assignments? Yeah, a team involved, absolutely. So they could be using mobile tools to to work together and to interact. Let them phone each other? Well, certainly. How about going out as a team together and filming something with a mobile camera or creating a production? Go and create a video about X, Y, and Z. And we have to do that together, and we'll take the camera and film it and edit it and take it back. Yes, please.
Something like Quora, Q&A forums where they ask each other questions and the other person.
Okay, so they could be creating their own questions and asking of it each other. Absolutely. And yeah, and making a game of it even. So who comes up with questions, who answers them?
I remember there's a innovative company where they send the instructors to remote places where usually they can't take the complete class. Then instructor would just broadcast the geography live and give a virtual lecture on mobile devices. So that's how innovative, and student could be sitting either in classroom or at homes. And there was chat, voice, text, everything.
Yeah, imagine going on a field trip and not the person who's homesick, but they could be in touch by camera, by phone, by MMS messages. Sure. And recording. How about having students create field trips for other folks, for each other? So teams of them create a field trip. We go here and we're going to capture what you see here, what you hear, and tell you the story, and then you do that one, and we have it. Lots of opportunities to start getting people out in the world, collecting data out in the world, and bringing it back.
Students would probably use mobile devices to tell their parents what exactly happened in class. If there's some sort of, a way to involve your parents.
Ah, okay.
To know what exactly happened in class or anything, so that they have a multimedia sort of a platform to show it off on.
So they could capture something they performed in front of the class when the parents can't go during the day, and they can bring it home and show the parents? Absolutely, that'd be great. Yeah, not just learner participation, but parent participation. We know learning is improved when parents are involved in the learning process.
It would be very effective in language learning. You could have a Twitter hashtag with synonyms, or running stream of synonyms, maybe a homework assignment or something. Or even calling each other to learn a foreign language. If it's a French class in India, they could use the phone to actually converse in French.
They could indeed. And there are sites where people converse in French, and other language learners want to go there and practice their language too. They could do a chat, and they could host their own little group chat and practice their skills. They might even have a storyline. It's a high-class party or something, and they have to role play. In fact, Sandra Wills, Elizabeth Lee, and Albert Ipp wrote a wonderful book on online role plays that they were doing through the internet. But there's no reason you couldn't do them through mobile devices too and spread it out. And it would be a mix of an alternate reality game and a role play game, and space it out over space and time. So the limits are really our creativity. These tools bring us anywhere, anywhen. Here's an interesting question. Sort of for organizational, but I think it's for formal learning too. When should you connect to someone versus deliver content? In other words, so oftentimes we deliver content, but when would it actually make sense to have them connect to someone rather than go and review some content? Even canned audio. When would it make sense to connect to a live person? For the learner to connect to a live person or the performer?
Learning is not something based on factual information, but more on perspective.
So when it's subjective viewpoints, opinions. Sure? Oral exercises. Oh, okay, when it's dependent on their verbal performance. Sure.
So the bottom of the pyramid students, with the basic concepts, we give them an audio bridge number. They have to call in at a scheduled time onto that number, and there is a facilitator. It's a group login, and they interact, language is taught, and it's been almost 2 months, and the results have been definitely.
So a conference call type of thing. Well, I was thinking there are other situations when the content is highly volatile, when it's changing so much that by the time you capture it, it's out of date. Connect to the person. If the situation is unique, partly that's the subjective thing where it's what is our opinion about this right now. But when it's such a rare occurrence, it's just easier to connect to the expert than it is to deal with trying to figure out every possible situation that would be. The cost of access is low. Sometimes content development can be high, and yet you have the person hanging around waiting, looking for something to do. Or the need for personal touch or mentoring is high, which is made, the situation where it's the verbal performance.
Or probably when intrinsic motivation is less, when people are more likely to drop out in a course like that, if somebody talking to you live is better.
So the high touch could be a component of increasing the learning experience and therefore the success of the course. Sure. And we already mentioned the alternate realities, the where you are, when you are, and the augmented reality, where you are and when you are, and the alternate realities. I want you to think. It's a little bit like the experiment, but differently. So now think about your learners again. And I think this is the very last exercise I'm going to have you do. So we're almost done, okay? But I want you to think about, remember what content is, what compute is, what communicate is, what capture is, and think about what could we do dependent on where the learner is, taking advantage of each of those. And given we're on limited time now, and when we are, I'd like something in every row and something in every column, but just take a chance to say, if they were here, what content would I deliver to them? If they were here, what computational resource might I provide? If they were here, who would I connect them to? If they were here, what would I ask them to capture? When they are. We know what they're doing. We don't know, it doesn't matter where it is, like they're in a meeting. It could be in the meeting room, it could be in the cafeteria, but we know they're in a meeting. What content, what computation, what could we communicate, what could we capture? Just take a quick stab at trying to fill out something in at least in each column, and at least two of the four rows, just as an exercise, okay? You guys are used to this now, right? And I just made a note to myself to take them out, make them into files, that it will happen sometime in the future. But you're also welcome to email me for, a copy of the slides or something if it's of any use to you, and I'll happily do that. So one of the things that happens in many contexts is, what are our policies? Are we going to provide a device, or are we going to ask them to have their own device? If we do provide a device, what policies should we expect to have for there? If we provide them a device, are they responsible if it gets lost or broken? Or do we have some sort of insurance policy on it? When do we give it to them, and under what circumstances do we ask for it back? How do we track it? A bunch of issues. If instead we let them use their own device, or require, what sort of policy are we going to have? Are we going to try and support every device? Are we going to support a limited device and say this is an adjunct for those who can take advantage of it, but it's not available? We are not going to try and make sure it's available for you. If you want that, get the device. And if you're only supporting a subset of the device, you're going to make it easy for them to get one of those devices. These are types of policy decisions you should be wrestling with when doing this. Social use. Are you going to put any parameters on acceptable use? If you make a communication chat room available, how are you going to constrain around cyberbullying? They could do it, right? In this chat room, this French language chat room that they're using, really cool, and it's a great idea. But what if several gang up on one person there? Because in real life, they have some problems. You need to figure out, a priori, anticipate some of these problems get on. And securing the device. In organizations, many times, they're concerned about their data getting outside to the extent that they're absolutely crazy about it. We do have ways to make these things secure, but they don't remember it. But think of the flip side. I don't know about here, but in the US, they're very touchy about releasing student information. and rightly so. How do you control that in a way that makes you keep it safe for your learners? You know, you want to strike that balance between keeping it safe from them and empowering them as much as possible. And so there's some policy issues you do have to wrestle with when you start thinking about mobile. In organizations and probably in institutions well, one of the things to think about is that mobile doesn't have to stand on its own. There may be some other initiative you can ride on the back of. So if they are looking at a knowledge management system or a content management system, say, oh, by the way, if you make that mobile available, we can actually use it for some other reasons. For a marginal extra cost, we'll get this additional capability. It's the ROI. If they're rolling out mobile devices for some other reason, in organizations they tend to do it like, you know, a number of the airlines are now using tablets instead of the flight safety checklist, the big books. They're putting it on the iPad because they can put all the plane's checklists on the iPad and make it interactive. So you can tick it off each time and it can record. But as long as they have devices, could we be using it for mobile learning too? Hey, you've already got the devices. Let's just marginal extra cost, being opportunistic. If you're putting out wireless networks, well, you know, instead of having to worry about wiring a device, we're going to do wireless networks. Well, let's make sure people, wherever they are, can take advantage of it, so we'll support mobile devices as well. And we can maybe start thinking of mobile opportunities. Portals, if we've got portals of resources, have we made them mobile available and mobile accessible? If they are, if they're not, well, what would it take to do it? Maybe it's only a small extra cost. Most portal software providers are facing the reality that a lot of demand for mobile, so if they don't already have it, it's in development. You can put pressure on them. And if you know the roles or the competencies of the learners, you can start using that as a basis for customizing the experience. So there's lots of things that organizations and institutions might be doing that you might be able to use, and with only a marginal extra cost, get a lot of extra capability for mobile learning, mobile performance support. Just be opportunistic if you can. So that's the end of the formal mobile workshop, with about 5 minutes till the official end. And as far as I know, I don't have to go anywhere till we head off. I don't know what's happening this evening or when. So nobody, you know, it's like we'll bring people in and won't give them any clue about what their schedule is or where they're supposed to be. So first of all, did that make sense to you? Is that of any use? I hope, well, those of you who stuck it out for the whole time, I'm so glad you did it. You know, you could have left. Vote with your feet. But the other thing is, are there any questions, any burning concerns? You know, I don't want to try and contextualize just for each of your individual companies. If you just generalize it to a principle that we might apply to other people, let's entertain the questions or comments. Do I have a demo of an end-to-end? Well, the one I showed on the negotiation, that's one that we did. Like I said, most of my work, oh, I didn't tell this to you, I did it on an interview. Most of my work is not actually doing the design anymore. I more tend to be strategic, assist people in putting into place strategies, or develop their processes and abilities to redefine their work process so that mobile becomes an automatic part of their stuff. Right. There are increasing examples of mobile. I did get some in the book, which I gave my copy to Biplav as a thank you for bringing me here. So I told him he had to make it available for anybody asked. If you want to have a look at the books beforehand to see if they're worth your while, go tackle them. And he's got them, and he promised he'd let you look at them. So he's got physical copies if you want to have a look at it. There's also a site where you can go read about the books a little bit, get some sample chapters if you're curious. But that's where there are examples. On the resources page for the books are a bunch of useful links. There's people to follow. There's great blogs. There's 2 apps. The ADL has produced a sort of mobile learning guide. ADL is the U.S. Department of Defense's Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. And Judy Brown and Jason Hagg have created a mobile learning guide that's available on iOS, on Android, and on mobile web. And so it's both an example of a mobile app and it's a mobile app about mobile apps. And then Float Learning has created the Mobile Learning Primer, or Primer, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And it's available on iOS and Android as well. And it's got some neat resources, including a little decision tree to decide whether you should do mobile web or custom develop for an app, and some other things. So both of those are great examples of apps you can download and play with and get. Not only do they demonstrate mobile, but they're about how to plan for mobile. So great resources there. Plus the Zen of Palm I mentioned, there's a link to it there, which I absolutely recommend everybody read who's at all thinking about mobile, just to get some of the gist. It's still, the principles there are still relevant, even if it's many years out of date. Sorry. Sorry?
When you're designing content for mobile, tablet, PCs, the book that you are mentioning, or the stuff that we did today, that kind of focused more on mobile-only content. Is there something, some guidelines, some book, or some kind of training material anywhere which caters to multi-device content design at the same time?
Not yet. Here's the story. I don't talk a lot about development for the simple reason that it's a moving target. By the time I say something and you go out and check it out, it'll be out of date. Things are moving so fast. Content isn't hard, just content. There are H264 for mobile video, or H263 or 264, I can't remember which. AVI files are for audio, no. WAV files, I think, are for audio. But there's a format, I'm having a senior moment about what the right format is, but MP3 for audio and MP4 for video are pretty ubiquitously available on mobile. PDFs, most devices have PDF readers, except non-smartphones. I don't know about them. But those, mobile web would be my best bet. Otherwise, trying to read a document on a regular cell phone screen is just an exercise in futility. You'd want to boil it down to minimalized text and make it available SMS or something. But minimalism, two things. The mobile web consortium, WWW's standard for mobile web, has been linked with accessibility. And what works for mobile works for accessibility, and it's just minimalist, stripping it. One place to look, Learning Solutions magazine on the web has articles. Look at their mobile articles. There's been a number of them that deal with a number of different issues. I can't recall if there's one specifically on content. But mostly, it's a very dynamic market.
Do you have any sense for how mobile learning apps are doing on the app stores, on the iPhone App Store and the Android app form? Like, are people making money on this? Are they getting huge downloads? Do you know how? I
don't know. The free apps are doing really well. But I know in geometry, for instance, the Geometer Sketchpad, the iPad app is being used a lot because it lets you download stuff and use it in the classroom and take it out. I think it depends on how general purpose and how powerful it is. So it's probably greatly variable, but I haven't tracked the market. Particularly, I don't know, are you talking K-12 higher ed, organizational learning? Yeah. I think it's still early days. I think, but I really haven't tracked. And I don't think there's very many people who are tracking it yet. Gary Woodall might be one person I'd think of looking at. He wrote The Mobile Learning Edge, another mobile learning book. It's very much an analyst book, and it's a year out of date now. But he might be doing something new, have some recent thing. Tomi Ahonen looks at mobile market overall, but I don't think he specifically looks at the learning market. I literally don't know if anybody is, and I'm not an analyst, and I don't want to be. So I haven't been, and I'm not quite sure how you track that. But sorry, so I really don't know. But oh, we have a hard stop. Okay. Well, I thought we had a soft stop. I keep talking, but I'm available here until you guys are done. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your conference.